Aliens called for help. Deathworlders answered with firepower. The signal reached the Vanguard on a Tuesday. It came in clean, too clean for a world with failing atmospheric processors. No static, no harmonic drift from failing equipment, just a perfect acoustic distress signature, textbook correct, broadcasting from the border colony of Oakhaven, where 8,412 people were supposedly choking on thinning air. Lieutenant Sarah Arkafer had been drinking bad coffee when the alert came in. She set the cup on the nav console and did not pick it up again. "Signal integrity at 100%, she said, which is odd. Commander Dre, standing at the main display, said nothing for 3 seconds. Then, "Log it and proceed. We have the cores aboard, that's what we came for." The Vanguard was a relief ship, unarmed, painted in the pale green that all humanitarian vessels wore by Terran Bureau convention. 40 atmospheric stabilization cores sat in her cargo bay, each one worth more than the ship itself. They were the kind of machines that took a dying colony's air supply and bought it another decade. A gift, an investment in someone else's survival. No one on the Vanguard's crew found that strange. It was what they did. Arkafer pulled up the colony's last known population register, 8,412 names. She scrolled past the first screen of them, past Adiz and Buruk and Constance and Fyoda, all the way down to where the list kept going, and she thought about the air getting thin. She closed the register and went back to her instruments. The Vanguard dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Oakhaven system at 3:40 ship time. By 3:43, they were caught. The Valari ships had been sitting dark for 11 hours, running on passive hold with every emission suppressed. There were 9 of them, 3 heavy cruisers and 6 interdiction frames, and they rose out of the black so fast that the Vanguard's collision alert had time to sound exactly once before the tractor systems locked. High Provost Zyler watched the small green ship go still on his tactical display and ticked his signet ring against the edge of the obsidian console. Once, twice. "Shielding," he said. "None worth the term, Provost. Cargo manifest. 40 atmospheric cores, military-grade processing capability, civilian packaging." Zyler ticked the ring again. "Send the boarding frames." He did not raise his voice. There was no need. The Valari hegemony had been conducting operations like this one for 6,000 years across 300 worlds, and the math of it had long since settled into something automatic. A small species stumbles into a border sector it does not own. It carries hardware that a greater power can use. The greater power takes the hardware. The small species files a protest through whatever council it belongs to. The council notes the protest. No one acts. The hardware changes hands. Simple, clean, structural. The boarding frames hit the Vanguard's cargo bay in under 4 minutes. Zyler watched the drone feeds cycle through the hold stacked cores, each one sealed in transit foam, exactly as the manifest said. He watched his technical teams break the seals on the first 6 units and run ID scans. Confirmed, human manufacture, Bureau of Logistics and Transit, Terran origin, all 40 units present. Zyler straightened in his command chair and touched the broadcast key. What he said next went out on an open frequency, not just to the Vanguard, but logged to the sector relay so that any vessel within 3 light hours could receive it and archive it. This transmission is addressed to the crew of the humanitarian vessel presently in Valari interdiction hold. Be advised, altruism is an uncalibrated biological investment with 0 structural return. Your vessel and its cargo are seized under hegemony doctrine of resource correction. Your crews will be integrated into our outer rim logistics infrastructure as uncompensated labor. Do not look for them. There is no mechanism by which you will be located or recovered. This is not a threat, it is a mathematical statement of your current position. He released the broadcast key. He ticked the ring once more. Done. If Zyler had been watching the Vanguard's internal feeds at that precise moment, and he was not, because the Vanguard was already categorized as a closed matter, he would have seen Commander Dre standing very still at the center of the bridge, hands at his sides, eyes on the forward display where 9 Valari ships held every exit closed. Arkafer looked at him. Orders. Dre was quiet for 4 seconds, then he said, "Open a channel." She opened it. Dre's voice came out level, not flat, not broken, just level the way a measuring instrument is level. "We understand your position, Provost. We will comply with the disembarkation orders." That was all. No argument, no threat, no appeal to any charter or compact or rule of space. Just acknowledgement and compliance, delivered in the same tone someone might use to confirm a maintenance schedule. Zyler's communications officer flagged the response and read it aloud. Zyler listened, then said, "Note it." The file on humanity was updated. Species AD472, biologically cooperative, altruistic behavioral architecture lacking defensive cognitive structures, non-retaliation index confirmed by field observation, mathematical threat assessment negligible. Under the hegemony's doctrine, a doctrine refined over 43 years of border contact with a dozen species, non-retaliation within 4 minutes of a provocation event was scored as structural defeat. The species that did not strike back had already calculated its own loss. Its silence was not patience, it was surrender wearing a face. That was the doctrine, it had never been wrong. Stay with me, the silence you're about to hear, it lasted 12 years, and it was the loudest thing humanity ever did. 12 years earlier, or to be precise, the day after the Vanguard's crew was loaded aboard Valari transport ships and routed toward the Outer Rim logistics hubs, a woman named Director Evelyn Vance walked into a small administrative office in a building that did not appear on any published map of the Bureau of Logistics and Transit. The office smelled of air recyclers set too cold and the faint chemical trace of new laminate flooring. One window frosted, one desk, one chair, a wall of subspace monitoring arrays that covered the far side of the room from floor to ceiling, 12 screens, all dark, the status lights cycling slow amber like something waiting to be switched on. She sat down, she pulled the contact list from her personal file. She found the name she was looking for, which was the name of the engineer who had originally designed the atmospheric core series that the Vanguard had been carrying, and she placed a call. The engineer picked up on the second ring. "I need to know," Vance said, "whether the cores have their own internal maintenance cycle." A pause, weekly diagnostic sweep. Every unit runs it automatically regardless of where it's installed. Checks the filtration subarrays, logs the environmental data, packages it, and if there's a network node available, it transmits the package. On a fixed schedule. Tuesday, 4 in the morning, station time. Vance wrote that down on paper, not a screen paper, a legal pad she had taken from the supply drawer, the kind of thing that could not be remotely accessed or deleted. The pen was the cheap kind that ran out of ink before you expected it to. She wrote Tuesday 400. Then she wrote hardware knows where it is. Then she underlined it. "Thank you," she said, "this conversation didn't happen." The engineer said, "What conversation?" and hung up. Vance set the pen down on the legal pad, parallel to the page's edge, the way she always did. She turned and looked at the 12 dark screens on the far wall. She did not turn them on yet. She left the office, walked down the corridor to a second room, and spent the next 40 minutes in a meeting with 4 people whose names are not in any file this story will name. By the end of that meeting, they had agreed on a project codename. Project Mirror Grid. By the time she walked out of that building, the first line of code had been written. It was not a weapon. It was not a signal jammer or a targeting system or any of the things a species might reach for in the first hours after losing 8,412 people to a provocation designed to prove that reaching was pointless. It was a listener. 17 lines of hardware-level instruction, small enough to hide inside the maintenance subarray of an atmospheric core, invisible to any standard security scan because it used the core's own diagnostic cycle as cover. Every Tuesday at 400, when the core ran its automatic check and packaged its environmental data for transmission, those 17 lines hitched a ride. They would go wherever the cores went, and the cores, the Valari had already told her, were going directly into the environmental networks of their core military worlds. She went home, she made tea, she set the mug on the kitchen counter and stood at the window for a while looking at nothing. The 12 screens in the monitoring room stayed dark for 6 more days. On the following Tuesday at 4:04 station time, the first data packet came back. Vance was already at her desk when it arrived. She had been there since 300. She opened the packet. It was small, 32 kilobytes of environmental telemetry from inside a Valari climate control hub. But buried inside that telemetry, tagged to a routing subheader that the Valari automated systems would never read because they were looking for anomalies, not absences, were the first 9 characters of Mirror Grid's map. She saved the file, she closed the packet, she wrote the date on the legal pad. Then she drew a small square on the page and labeled it Core 1. 40 squares, 12 years, 4,382 days. One Tuesday at a time. In the Hegemony's Sector Analysis Division, there was a sub-commander named T-Vath who reviewed the automated routing logs for the Outer Rim supply network. T-Vath was meticulous, which was why the position existed. Supply networks at this scale generated enough log data each week to bury an analysis team, and the hegemony had long ago decided that one careful pair of eyes was cheaper than 40 careless ones. On the 43rd Tuesday after the Oakhaven acquisition, TVATH noticed something. Not a spike, not an error code, just a very slight, very consistent routing variance in the subspace data packets from a cluster of environmental cores installed in the Devon processing station. The variance was small enough to fit in a footnote. It was, to be exact, a fraction of a percent of the total transmission load, a number so minor that TVATH had to look at it 3 times to confirm it was real. The packets came in every Tuesday, the variance appeared every Tuesday, it had been there since the cores were installed. TVATH pulled the core documentation, Human Manufacture Bureau of Logistics and Transit, primitive hardware by Valari standards, legacy architecture. TVATH filed a note, routing variance in human-sourced cores, likely legacy tracking artifact from original manufacture. No security implication, variance is consistent and non-escalating, monitor passively. The note was filed, it was not flagged, no one else read it. Vance, who would not know about TVATH for another 4 years, continued pulling data packets on Tuesday mornings, and continued mapping the Valari network one routing node at a time. The squares on the legal pad filled in slowly. She never stopped counting them. The second Tuesday, Vance arrived at 3:15. She brought the same tea she always made, black, no sugar, in a dented travel mug she had owned for 11 years. She set it on the desk to the right of the legal pad, always the same spot, and she waited. At 400, the packet came in from Core 7, Devon Station, a climate hub on the 3rd floor of a Valari Logistics Command building, based on the footprint data embedded in the environmental telemetry. The routing header showed 2 upstream relay nodes she had not seen before. She added them to the map. By the end of that second Tuesday, the legal pad had 41 squares, 40 for the cores, 1 for the first relay node MirrorGrid had seen through Core 7's connections. The 41st square was labeled in small, neat handwriting, Relay A1, Command Tier, check next week. She did not check her phone, she did not look at the news. She made a second cup of tea, turned off the monitors and left. That was the shape of it, not a war room, not a crisis center. 1 woman, 1 desk, 1 mug in the same spot, 1 Tuesday at a time. By the end of the first year, Vance had mapped 63 routing nodes. She knew she was inside a supply network. The packet signatures said logistics infrastructure, not military command. But supply networks and command networks touched each other. They had to power climate environmental maintenance. All of it ran on the same underlying architecture. The Valari automated their supply lines so completely that a single maintenance sweep from a single hub could bounce a signal through half a dozen adjacent systems before it returned home. MirrorGrid rode every bounce. The legal pad ran out after 4 months. She switched to a dedicated local drive, air-gapped, stored in a locked drawer. The drive held a single file, the file held a map. The map grew every Tuesday. In the second year, MirrorGrid found the propulsion maintenance network for the Valari's 3rd border fleet. Not the command codes, not the targeting systems, just the maintenance logs, the automated checks that every ship's drive system ran to confirm its own integrity, the same kind of check that had created the opening in the first place. But maintenance logs for a warship's drive system contain a great deal of information about how that drive is built, what it can tolerate, and what would make it stop. Vance noted this in a file she labeled structural. She did not act on it, she continued mapping. In the 3rd year, MirrorGrid found the reactor safety architecture. That was the Tuesday she sat in her chair for a long time after the packet came in, doing nothing. The mug of tea went cold beside the keyboard. She looked at the routing diagram on her screen, the chain of nodes linking Core 12, a climate unit in a Valari orbital facility, to the safety handshake protocol of the station's antimatter containment system. The safety handshake was not a weapon, it was a handshake, a routine signal the containment system sent to its own management architecture every 6 hours to confirm that conditions were stable. But MirrorGrid was now inside the management architecture, which meant MirrorGrid could respond to the handshake, which meant MirrorGrid could, in theory, send back a different answer. She did not write this down, not on paper, not in any file. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up the cold tea and drank it anyway, grimacing at the temperature, and she began to plan the next phase of the map. The Valari reclassified Earth in the 4th year. The formal document, a routine sector administration update, the kind that moved through hegemony bureaucracy the way water moves through pipes, without urgency, downgraded humanity from species AD 472, monitored non-threatening to species AD 472, archived non-relevant. The monitoring allocation was cancelled. The border watch stations were reduced to skeleton crews. The hegemony had 6,000 years of data on what happened when a species did not strike back. They had never been wrong. Zyler, by the 4th year, had been promoted to High Provost of Sector 7 and had not thought about the Vanguard since the week it happened. The Oakhaven acquisition had been logged, processed, and filed. The 40 cores were performing exactly as expected inside their new installations. The human crew were distributed across Outer Rim labor assignments, where their cooperative behavioral architecture made them efficient and easy to manage. He had other things to think about: bigger species, harder problems. Species 8472 was finished. In the 4th year, in a labor facility on the Outer Rim, a man named Joran Adami ran a calibration check on the atmospheric processor he had been assigned to maintain. He had been doing this every week for 4 years. The processor was not one of the original 40, it was a Valari unit, older, installed in a cargo staging station where the air recyclers needed constant adjustment or the code 2 levels crept up by midday. Joran had figured this out in his 2nd week. He had started fixing it without being asked. The Valari supervisors had noticed his efficiency and assigned him a 2nd unit, then a 3rd. He did not know about mirror grid. He did not know that in an administrative building on Earth, a woman he had never met was building a map using signals from atmospheric cores exactly like the ones he maintained. He did not know any of it. He knew the processor. He knew which valve ran cold in the first hour of a Tuesday morning and what to do about it, and how to make the fix last until the following week, so he only had to do it once. He had learned the unit the way you learn anything you live with, slowly, completely, by being in the same room with it long enough that its habits became your habits. He ate lunch at the same bench every day outside if the air was breathable, which it usually was in the afternoon. He had a small photograph printed on actual paper of his daughter Nneka, who had been 7 when the Vanguard left and was now 11. He kept it folded in his breast pocket because the Valari supervisors had not prohibited personal items and he had not asked permission. Every Tuesday morning, Core 17, one of the original 40 from the Vanguard's cargo hold, installed in the station's secondary climate hub 2 floors above the bench where Joran ate lunch, ran its maintenance cycle. He did not know. By year 6, the map was large enough that Vance began to need help reading it. She brought in 2 analysts, people who had the right clearances, which meant people who had been waiting for years in roles that officially did not exist, doing work they could not describe to anyone they knew. She briefed them in the small room with the frosted window. She showed them the map. The senior analyst, a woman named Rook, looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You're inside their reactor safety system. Mirror Grid has read access to the handshake protocol on 11 stations. Yes. Read access not right. Read access not right." Vance paused. "Yet." Rook looked at her. "When did you plan to mention this to anyone above your clearance level?" "I'm mentioning it to you now." Rook turned back to the map. "How much of the 3rd Border Fleet?" 70% of the maintenance architecture, not command, not navigation. The physical systems, drives, climate, reactor safety on the automated units. The automated units, Rook understood immediately, the Conclave ships. Yes, sir. The Triannual Sector Conclave was the hegemony's largest coordinated military review. Every 3 years, the automated warships of the sector fleet, the ones that ran on pre-programmed patrol routes without crews, managed entirely through remote maintenance and command handshakes, assembled at a designated point to receive their updated command packages for the next cycle. They gathered in formation. They held their positions. They ran their handshakes. 1,200 of them. "The next conclave," Vance said, "is in 6 years. Rook said nothing. "We have 6 years," Vance said, "to get from 70% to full coverage, and to move from red access to something else." "How?" "The same way we got here, one Tuesday at a time." Year 8. Tivath, still reviewing routing logs, noticed the variance again. It had not changed. Still the same tiny fraction of a percent, still appearing every Tuesday, still confined to the cores installed in the secondary climate systems of mid-tier facilities. This time Tivath wrote a slightly longer note. The variance had been present for 8 years without escalation. This suggested it was definitively a legacy artifact of the original human hardware. Tivath recommended against replacement of the units on cost grounds. The cores were performing well above their rated specifications, and there was no operational reason to pull them. The recommendation was approved. The cores stayed. Tivath went home, made dinner, forgot about it. Year 10, a Tuesday in late spring, station time. Vance was at her desk at 300. The monitoring room had expanded over the years. 5 analysts worked it now, each with their own screen, the map on a shared display that covered most of the far wall. The map had long since outgrown the legal pad. It had long since outgrown anything that could be described as small. The 400 packet from Core 1 came in first, as always because Core 1 was in the closest Valari facility and its signal reached them fastest. Then Core 7, Core 12. The others followed in the order they always did, the same sequence every Tuesday, reliable as a calendar. At 4:47, Mirrorgrid completed its first successful write test. Not to a live system, to a sandbox simulation of the handshake protocol built from 2 years of observed handshake traffic, but the simulation matched the live architecture within a margin that Rook's team had spent 4 months verifying. The write test said, "I am the containment system, everything is stable." The sandbox accepted it. Vance looked at the result on her screen. She picked up the travel mug, the same one, still dented in the same place on the left side, and she held it without drinking. After a moment, she set it back down in its usual spot. "Note the time," she said to the room. "Log it and lock it." She did not use the word success. That word implied they were done, and they were not done. They were at the edge of done. There was a difference, and she felt it precisely, the way you feel the difference between the last mile of a long road and the road itself. 2 years left to the conclave. In the monitoring room, on a shelf above the secondary console, there was a small object that had been there since year 1, a square of laminate flooring tile, cut from the off-cut pile left by the workers who had laid the floor before Vance moved in. She had picked it up from the hallway and set it on the shelf without thinking about it. It was the color of pale wood, slightly warped on one end. No one had ever moved it. It sat there through the years the way the mug sat on the desk, unimportant, specific, anchored. Year 12, the 97th Tuesday of that year. The data packet from Core 1 arrived at 400 exactly, as it had 4,381 times before. Rook was at her station. The 2 junior analysts had the other screens. Vance sat at the center console, the legal pad long retired, no longer used, visible in the open drawer to her left. She kept it there, she was not sure why. The packet opened, the routing data came through, and with it came the sync confirmation string that Mirrorgrid had been building toward for the last 6 months, the full administrative handshake for the Valari Third Border Fleet's automated command relay, including the live write access credential to the reactor safety fields of every automated ship in the network. All 1,200 of them. Mirrorgrid had it. Not the weapons, not the navigation, not the targeting systems. The safety fields, the physical layer between the antimatter in each ship's core and the containment architecture that kept it stable. The layer that, if it responded incorrectly to a handshake, would trigger an emergency shutdown across the entire drive system. Mirrorgrid held the keys to 1,200 emergency shutdowns. And more than that, it held the network credential that allowed it to push a signal to every command console aboard every automated ship simultaneously. Rook turned from her screen and looked at Vance. She did not say anything. There was nothing that needed saying. The map on the far wall had gone from 40 squares to a full coverage routing diagram of the Valari Third Border Fleet's entire physical maintenance architecture, built one Tuesday morning at a time over 12 years, using the enemy's own automated supply network as the wire. The conclave was in 11 days. Xyler had already given the opening address. Vance picked up the travel mug. It was still warm. She drank. 11 days, she said. She put the mug back in its spot. "Get me the conclave coordinates." The triannual sector conclave opened, as it always did, with music. Not music in the human sense, not melody, not rhythm built for feeling. The Valari transmission tone was a carrier wave harmony, a mathematically precise chord that the hegemony's automated systems used to synchronize their clocks across a sector. It had been the same chord for 6,000 years. It meant, we are aligned, we are in position, we are ready. 1,200 automated warships broadcast it simultaneously. High Provost Xyler stood at the command lectern of the Ascendant Measure, the hegemony flagship, and listened to the chord resolve across his tactical display. 1,200 green icons, each one a ship, each one responsive, each one logged and confirmed. He had presided over 2 previous conclaves. He knew what 1,200 green lights looked like. He knew the particular satisfaction of a formation this complete, not a single unit missing, not a single handshake dropped. He began his address. Third Border Fleet, Sector 7 Administrative Cycle, Year 47. This conclave marks the successful completion of another operational period characterized by, he did not read from notes, he never did, the continued expansion of hegemony resource integration across 12 newly acquired systems, the reclassification of 9 monitored species to archived status, and the sustained operational readiness of this fleet at 100% of rated capacity. He paused to let the sync logs confirm the address was being received by all units. They were all 1200, green across the board. "We proceed," he said, "to command package distribution." He touched the key. In the monitoring room on Earth, Vance watched the conclave feed on the center screen, routed through a relay node Mirror had found in Year 9, a passive listener only, no footprint, and she said very quietly, "Now." Rook's hands were already moving. The first ship to go dark was the prevailing argument, a mid-tier patrol cruiser in the 4th rank of the formation. Its green icon on Xylo's display shifted to amber, then gray, then it disappeared from the formation log entirely. Xyler looked at it, maintenance report on Unit 477. His communications officer pulled the feed. "No maintenance report. Unit 477 is not transmitting. Bring it back online. The command is not being acknowledged, Provost." The second ship went dark, the third. The 4th and 5th went simultaneously, side by side in the 7th rank, their icons blinking out like lights behind a hand passing over them. Xyler stood straighter. "What is this?" No one answered because no one knew. The board was changing too fast for answers, not a cascade failure, not the geometric spread of a system's collapse, something more deliberate. The ships were going dark in a pattern, rank by rank, working outward from the formation's center like a tide going out, and the pattern was it was. "It's a spiral," his tactical officer said, voice stripped of everything but the observation. "It's moving in a spiral." The spiral took 4 minutes and 17 seconds to complete. When it was done, all 1200 icons on Xylo's tactical display were gray. The formation was still there in physical space, 1200 ships holding position intact, undamaged, but their command channels were closed, their handshakes were not responding, their reactor safety fields were in a held state that the Ascendant Measure's own systems could not read, could not query, could not override. They were dark the way a room is dark when someone else has turned off all the lights from outside. The conclave cord had stopped. Xyler stood at the lectern in the silence it left behind and did not move for 3 seconds. Then he said, in the voice that had not changed in 47 years of command, "Raise Earth." "Provost, raise Earth." His communications officer tried. The standard diplomatic channel, the emergency channel, the hegemony's own sector relay. Each one came back with a routing response that should not have existed, not a block, not a refusal, but a redirect. The kind a network sends when a message has been intercepted and is being held in a queue. Someone else's queue. The main screen on the bridge of the Ascendant Measure, the large display, the one that showed the formation, that showed the sector map, that had shown 1200 green lights 11 minutes ago, changed. It showed a face. A human face, a woman, middle-aged, hair beginning to gray at the temples, sitting at a desk in a room that appeared to be lit by the glow of monitoring screens. She was wearing what looked like a government department jacket, the practical kind with a lot of pockets. There was a travel mug on the desk to her right. The desk had a drawer that was slightly open, and in the drawer, barely visible, barely anything, was the edge of a yellow legal pad. She looked directly at the camera. She had clearly been waiting for him to look back. She said, "Hi, Provost Xyler." Her voice was level, not flat, not cold, just level, the way a measuring instrument is level. He had heard a voice like that once before, 12 years ago, from a commander on a small green ship who had agreed to disembark without resistance, and he had filed it as compliance. He was not sure he would file it the same way now. "My name is Director Evelyn Vance. I represent the Bureau of Logistics and Transit, Terran origin. You may remember us." A pause, brief, precisely placed. "We sent you 40 atmospheric cores 12 years ago. We understand you found them useful." On the Ascendant Measure, 3 of Xylo's officers were already working to bypass the main screen's input protocol. 2 more were attempting a direct line to the fleet's command relay. 1 was running a systems diagnostic to determine how the screen had been accessed in the first place. None of them were getting anywhere. Xyler did not move. He watched the screen. "I want to talk to you," Vance continued, "about structural return." She did not look down at notes. She did not look away from the camera. "You told us 12 years ago that altruism was an uncalibrated biological investment with 0 structural return. I have thought about that a great deal. You were describing a framework. a way of assessing what a species is likely to do based on what it has already done, whether it will strike back, whether its silence means it is broken, or whether it means something else. She picked up the travel mug, held it. We were silent for 12 years. I understand why you interpreted that the way you did. Your doctrine is built from 6,000 years of data, and the data is consistent. Species that do not retaliate in the first minutes do not retaliate at all. The silence is surrender. You are not wrong to believe that. You have never been wrong before. She set the mug back down. What your doctrine does not have a category for, she said, is a species that is not retaliating, a species that is working. The monitoring screens behind her were visible now, just barely, just enough to see that there were many of them, and that they were all showing something, and that what they were showing was a map. The 40 cores you took from us are still running. They have been running for 12 years. They run a maintenance cycle every Tuesday at 400 and every Tuesday at 400 for 4,382 consecutive Tuesdays. We have been listening to everything they touched. Your supply network, your propulsion maintenance logs, your reactor safety architecture, your command handshake protocols. A pause, your conclave formation data. She looked at him steadily. We are not inside your weapons systems. We are not inside your navigation or your targeting. We are inside the physical layer, the safety fields, the containment handshakes, the drive integrity protocols of every automated unit in your third border fleet, all 1,200. You can see that they are not responding to your commands. That is because they are responding to ours, which at the moment is hold. Behind her, Rook was visible for just a moment, turning from her screen. The junior analysts were still watching. The room was very quiet. I am going to make this simple, Vance said. In 12 hours I will contact you again. In that conversation I want to discuss the return of 8,412 people, by name each one who were taken from the humanitarian vessel Vanguard 12 years ago and placed in your Outer Rim labor network. I want a full manifest of their current locations and a transfer schedule. I want atmospheric stabilization infrastructure restored to Oakhaven Colony, which has been without it for 12 years. And I want a formal acknowledgement, logged to the same sector relay you used to broadcast your original statement, that the hegemony doctrine of resource correction does not apply to Terran humanitarian vessels or their crews. She let that sit for a moment. If you meet those terms, I will return command access to your fleet, all 1,200 units fully operational, no damage, no data erased. We will withdraw Mirrorgrid from your networks on a verified schedule that your own technical teams can observe and confirm. You will have your ships back and we will have our people back, and we can decide together what kind of relationship we want to have after that. She picked up the mug again, drank. If you do not meet those terms, I would like you to consider what 1,200 simultaneous drive system shutdowns looks like on a sector map. Not weapons fire, not a battle, just 1,200 ships going still in formation, triggered by a safety field response to an incorrect handshake. An accident by every technical definition. The kind of thing that happens when legacy hardware, your word, Provost, legacy, fails in a way no one planned for. She set the mug down. We don't get angry, she said. We get to work, 12 years of work, one Tuesday at a time, using the hardware you took from us to build the map we needed. I want you to understand that. I want you to understand it the way I understood your statement 12 years ago, sitting on a ship you were in the process of seizing. A very slight pause. You told us altruism has zero structural return. For the first time, something shifted in her expression, not anger, not triumph, something quieter, something that had been waiting a long time to be said. We disagree. We think patience has a structural return. We think care has a structural return. We think that a species that sends relief ships to dying colonies and trains its engineers to maintain other people's equipment and keeps a photograph of a daughter in a breast pocket for 12 years, we think that species builds things that last. She looked directly at the camera. 12 hours, Provost, we'll talk then. The screen went dark. Zyler stood at the lectern for a long moment after the feed cut. The bridge was very quiet. His officers had stopped trying to bypass the display. The diagnostic was still running. It would keep running for the next 9 hours and return no useful result, because what Mirrorgrid had done was not an intrusion in any sense their security architecture was built to detect. It was a conversation. 17 lines of code riding inside a maintenance signal for 12 years until the conversation was complete. He looked at the tactical display, 1,200 gray icons, holding not destroyed, not damaged, waiting. He had filed humanity as non-threatening. He had filed their silence as surrender. He had taken their ships and their people and their hardware, and then he had stopped watching because 6,000 years of data said there was nothing left to watch. The data had not been wrong, it had been incomplete. He understood the distinction precisely now. "Get me the administrative council," he said. His voice was level. He was aware of how level it was and aware for the first time that level was not always the sound of someone who had won. Full session, emergency convening, priority override. His communications officer did not ask why. In the Outer Rim Labor Facility on a Tuesday morning, Joran Ademi was running his calibration check on the atmospheric processor when the station's general alert sounded. Not an emergency alarm, the two-tone sequence that meant administrative hold, all personnel to assigned stations, no movement until further notice. He stopped what he was doing. He stood in the maintenance corridor, one hand on the processor casing, and waited. After a while, a Valari supervisor came through and told the labor crew to return to their quarters. Her voice was different than usual, not unkind, just careful, the way voices get when someone is being careful about what they say. Joran went to his quarters. He sat on the edge of his bunk. He took the photograph of Nneka from his breast pocket. She was 7 in the photograph, grinning at something outside the frame, one tooth missing, and he set it on the mattress beside him where he could see it. He did not know what was happening. He could not know. But the alert had come on a Tuesday, and something about a Tuesday always made him feel, for reasons he could not have explained, that things were still being attended to somewhere, that the work was still going on, that someone was still at their desk. He looked at the photograph. He waited. The Administrative Council of the Valari Hegemony convened in emergency session on the 14th floor of the Sector 7 Command Hub, in a room designed for decisions exactly like this one. There were 9 members. They sat in a curved formation around a central display that showed, in real time, 1,200 grey icons holding position in the Oakhaven border sector. The icons had been grey for 6 hours. They had not changed. High Provost Zeiler stood at the head of the table and gave them the facts in the order they had occurred. He did not editorialize. He did not minimize. He said, a human operative identified as Director Evelyn Vance had contacted the Ascendant Measure via the flagship's main display screen, through a channel that should not have been accessible and was not yet understood. She had demonstrated simultaneous control of the reactor safety fields of every automated unit in the 3rd Border Fleet. She had issued terms. She had given 12 hours. 8 hours remained. Council member Doran, who oversaw sector intelligence, said, the cores. Yes, the human atmospheric cores. Installed in our climate infrastructure 12 years ago. Yes, A silence. Doran turned to look at the tactical display, at the grey icons, at what 12 years of Tuesday mornings had built. We filed them as legacy hardware. Our subcommander Tivath filed a variance notation in Year 1, Zeiler said, and again in Year 8. The recommendation in Year 8 was to keep the cores on grounds of cost efficiency and performance. The recommendation was approved. No one said anything. There was nothing useful to say. The intelligence review would come later, and it would be thorough, and it would find exactly what everyone in this room already understood, that the variance had been there the whole time, 8 years of Tuesday mornings in the footnotes, and the footnotes had gone unread because the species was archived, because it was finished, because a species that did not retaliate in the first 4 minutes had already calculated its own loss. The doctrine had not been wrong. It had been incomplete. Zeiler looked at the grey icons. He thought about the word legacy. He had used it himself in the brief that approved the Oakhaven acquisition, legacy hardware. He had meant it as a dismissal. He understood now that it had been a description. The terms, he said, 8,412 personnel by name, transfer schedule from our Outer Rim labor network, atmospheric infrastructure restored to Oakhaven colony, a formal sector relay acknowledgement that the doctrine of resource correction does not apply to Terran humanitarian vessels. Council member Yeth said, and if we comply, she returns command access to the fleet, all 1,200 units operational, no damage, no data deleted. Mirror grid withdraws on a verified schedule observable by our own technical teams. Her word, Yeth said. The cores have been running for 12 years, Zeiler said. The maintenance cycle has run 4,382 times. In 4,382 Tuesdays she took nothing she did not state she would take. She built nothing she did not describe in that transmission. He paused. Her word is the longest operational record in this room. Yeth was quiet. The 9 council members looked at the grey icons. The vote took 4 minutes. The transfer orders went out at the 6th hour. They moved through the hegemony's administrative network the way all large-scale logistics orders moved, in batches, by facility, sorted by location and transport availability. The Outer Rim labor network had 14 facilities. The human personnel were distributed across all 14. logged under labor assignment codes that had been active for 12 years without a review flag. At Facility 7, the two-tone alert sounded at 3:40, administrative hold. Then 2 hours later, a second alert. This one had a different tone, a sequence the crew of the Vanguard had not heard before, because it was used only for administrative releases, and administrative releases of human labor personnel had not been processed in this sector in living memory. Joran Ademi was sitting on the edge of his bunk when the supervisor came to the door. The supervisor was a different one than usual, not his regular morning contact but someone from the administrative office, holding a document screen and looking at it with an expression Joran had not seen before. It was not unkind. It was, he thought, the expression of someone being very careful about what their face was doing. Ademi, the supervisor said, "Joran, Bureau of Logistics and Transit, Terran Origin, assigned to the Vanguard as Environmental Systems Maintenance Officer." "Yes," Joran said. "You're on the manifest." Joran did not move. He had learned in 12 years not to let himself move toward a thing before he understood what it was. "What manifest?" he said. The supervisor turned the document screen so he could read it. It was a name, his name in the header field above a transfer authorization code and a destination, Bureau of Logistics and Transit, Terran Origin, and below the destination in the remarks field a sentence that had clearly been added by whoever had generated the document: "All personnel to be returned to Origin, transfer per terms, full manifest 8412. Joran read it twice. Then he reached into his breast pocket and took out the photograph of Nneka. She was 7 in the photograph, grinning at something outside the frame, one tooth missing. She was 19 now. He held the photograph. He did not know what he looked like. He did not try to make his face do anything particular. He just looked at her at 7, at the missing tooth, at whatever it was outside the frame that had made her grin like that. The supervisor said quietly, "Transport is in 3 hours. You may bring personal items." Joran nodded. He folded the photograph and put it back in his breast pocket, where it had been for 12 years, in the same crease along the same fold line, worn smooth at the corners from the handling. He stood up. He went to begin. In the monitoring room at 6:02, the return signal came in from the conclave formation. Not a dramatic signal. Not a surrender broadcast or a formal capitulation address, just a routing confirmation from the Valari sector relay, the acknowledgement logged and time-stamped that the hegemony doctrine of resource correction did not apply to Terran humanitarian vessels or their crews, standard administrative format, bureaucratic language, the kind that had moved through the hegemony systems for 6,000 years without urgency. Rook read it off her screen. "It's there, sector relay, time-stamped, logged, permanent record." Vance looked at her screen. "And the manifest," she said. "Transfer orders active across all 14 facilities, 8,412 names, all of them." Vance looked at the map on the far wall, the full coverage routing diagram that had grown from 40 squares and a legal pad over 12 years, the map that had started with a corner office and a call to an engineer on a Tuesday morning at 300, the map that had ridden inside 40 stolen atmospheric cores for 4,382 consecutive Tuesdays until it held the keys to 1,200 ships. "Begin withdrawal," she said. "Clean, verified, their teams observe every step." Rook turned to her console. The withdrawal was methodical. Miragrid did not disappear the way a system crashes. It was taken apart in the order it had been built, node by node, routing credential by routing credential, the way you might disassemble something carefully so that it could be examined and confirmed gone. The Valari technical teams had access to the read logs. They could see exactly what Miragrid had touched, in what order, on what dates. 12 years of Tuesday mornings, visible in the audit trail, the entire shape of the operation laid out in the order it had happened. The grey icons on Xylo's tactical display began to come back online at 7:14, in the same spiral pattern they had gone dark, working inward from the formation's edges, each ship's command handshake restoring in sequence, the spiral closing on itself like a door being shut from the inside. The conclave cord did not restart. That cycle had passed. But the green icons returned, one by one, until at 8:31 the last one blinked back online and the display showed 1,200 ships, fully operational, holding formation intact. No damage, no data deleted, exactly as stated. Xyler stood at the lectern of the ascendant measure and looked at the display for a long time. His communications officer said, "Formation restored, Provost, all units responding normally." Xyler did not answer immediately. He was thinking about something Vance had said, a species that sends relief ships to dying colonies and trains its engineers to maintain other people's equipment, and the particular arithmetic of that statement. The Vanguard had been carrying 40 atmospheric cores to a colony it had no claim to. The mission had been altruistic. He had described altruism as an uncalibrated biological investment with zero structural return. He had been describing the wrong structure. He had been measuring what humanity would take. He had not thought to measure what humanity would build. Log it, he said finally to no one in particular. He did not specify what. His communications officer, who had been at this post for 19 years, logged everything anyway. In the drawer to the left of Vance's console, the legal pad sat where it had always sat. She had carried it from the first office, the one with the frosted window and the cold air recyclers, to this one, through 3 building changes and 2 equipment upgrades and 12 years of Tuesday mornings. It was full, every page, both sides, the early squares, the routing nodes, the year labels in small, neat handwriting. The pen had run out twice. She had replaced it with the same cheap kind. The last entry on the last page, in the margin of a routing diagram from year 11, was a single word she had written at 4:04 on the Tuesday that Mirror Grid first confirmed full write access. She had not been thinking. It was the kind of thing you write when you are alone and you do not need to be careful about your face. It said Tuesday. On the shelf above the secondary console, the square of laminate flooring tile sat in its usual place, slightly warped on one end. Vance picked up the travel mug. The tea inside it had gone cold while she was watching the withdrawal sequence. She drank it anyway. She set the mug back down in its spot to the right of the legal pad. She looked at the map on the far wall, the full coverage diagram, Mirror Grid's final shape before the withdrawal had started dismantling it. It was smaller now at 8:47 than it had been an hour ago. By end of day it would be gone, cleared from the Valari network the way a sound clears from a room, leaving no damage, no trace, only the knowledge that it had been there.